What's up guys, Brian back in the lab today bringing you another video, and today I am going to answer a question that I get asked all the time, and that is, how did you end up running a gecko breeding company for a living? Now this is a question I get asked all the time, not only constantly by other gecko keepers that want to know how I got into this and are looking for tips to start their own breeding company, but every single time I go anywhere outside of the gecko world, when I go to my wife's work parties or we meet other friends, and people inevitably ask, hey, what do you do for a living? And my answer is, I breed geckos and I sell them for money. And people always look at me and go, what? I thought I would give a quick answer to this question and kind of explain my personal history with reptiles, how I got into breeding, and how it evolved into being my full-time job. So my own personal history with reptiles actually did not start with crested geckos. It started years and years and years before that. Before geckos were even in the United States being kept as pets, my personal history with reptiles started with a garter snake. When I was 5 years old, I was out at a local lake with my mom and a friend of hers. We were walking around the lake and we happened to catch a garter snake, a little tiny garter snake like this big, and we took him home with us. My mom let him take him home with us. I specifically remember my mom had an old Ford Taurus station wagon, big old station wagon, and it had a built-in trash can in the middle. And we actually put the garter snake in the trash can of my mom's car because it had a lid, and then we could take it home with us. We kept it in a bucket in the backyard for about 2 weeks before it finally escaped. Not the best way to keep a pet, but in the early 90s as a kid, when you came across a snake, it was so exciting, and my mom actually let it take it home with us. That's where my passion for reptiles started. So after my first experience with my first pet snake, finding and catching snakes became something I was obsessed with as a kid. So the family that babysat me, a good friend of mine, his mom would watch me and my brother during the summers and before and after school while my mom was at work. Well, their house backed up to a big green space open area, so it was perfect for me. My entire childhood was spent mostly out in this giant field catching garter snakes. We used to have competitions, see who could catch the biggest snake, who could catch the most snakes. We'd collect them and put them all in a bucket and then let them all go. It was awesome for a 9-10-year-old kid. We even had a friend of my brother's, his older sister was terrified of snakes, so she would pay us 25 cents a piece to catch the snakes in their backyard and get rid of them. My whole childhood was just catching snakes out in the wild, in the dirt, digging through the ditches. It was such a good time, and it really built the foundation of my love for reptiles. Now, throughout my childhood growing up, I had several pet reptiles. I had a box turtle for a long time when I was a kid. I had a bunch of frogs that I caught and kept in a tank in my bedroom when I was in high school. But my first gecko was actually a leopard gecko. Now, it's one that I got from a friend of mine. It was a guy that I actually played in a band with. He called me up one day and he said, hey man, my girlfriend's got this gecko. She doesn't want it anymore. Would you be interested in it? So I drove over to her house and I gave this girl $20 for a normal wild type leopard gecko with the cage and everything. I absolutely loved this gecko. I didn't know anything about geckos at that point. It was the first one I'd ever really had contact with, and I fell in love with it. I named it Toby because I didn't know at the time it was a female, so her name was Toby. I had this gecko for 7 years. It was absolutely great, and that was really what introduced me to geckos. That first leopard gecko I got was all the way back in 2005, and it wasn't until several years later that I got into crested geckos. Now, my first experience with a crested gecko was actually in 2007. I was driving home with my girlfriend at the time. It was about 8:30 at night. I was tired. I just wanted to go home and go to bed, and my girlfriend wanted to stop at the pet store and look at the reptiles. To be honest with you, I was really annoyed and kind of upset with her, and I finally gave in and I stopped at the Petco I was driving past and took her inside. To this day, I think about what my life would be like had I just told her, no, honey, I'm tired. I need to go home and go to bed. I worked at like 3 in the morning at that time, so I had to go to sleep. Where would I be right now if I didn't stop at Petco with this girl? I don't even know. But we went inside, we went to the reptile display cages, and we saw this gecko, and my girlfriend just fell in love with it. Oh my God, that's the cutest thing ever. Had to go get the manager and ask if we could hold it and look at it. Of course, this was a crested gecko. I was exhausted, I was grumpy, I was tired, and then as soon as she put this gecko in my hand, I was blown away. I could not believe how soft this thing was, how exotic it looked with all these spikes coming out of its head. I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. Now, I'm sure that story sounds real familiar to a lot of you because honestly, that's the reaction most people have when they first handle one of these geckos. They're so easy to fall in love with. But despite my first impressions, I actually didn't own one of these for 2 more years. 2 years after that, I'm living in an apartment with a different girlfriend, and one day out of the blue, I just decided, hey, remember that really cool gecko I saw at that pet store that one time? I want to get one of those as a pet. So I found a girl on Craigslist that was selling a couple. I drove down there. I worked at a carpet cleaning place at the time. I drove there during my work day with my uniform on. I bought these 2 geckos and I brought them home with me. I was absolutely in love. At that point, breeding wasn't even on my radar. I didn't even realize that's something that people did. I was just happy to have my 2 geckos. A friend of mine from high school also had a crested gecko, so I invited her over one day. She brought her gecko over. I was going to show her my geckos. It was a whole gecko meetup thing. It was, you know, we were just excited. And she made a comment that changed my life. She looked at me at one point and she said, yeah, my boyfriend's going to buy me a female to go with my male, and I'm going to breed them. And my mind exploded. I was just like, I was blown away. I said, wait a minute. You're telling me I can make more of these? Like in my house, I can just create more? She's like, yeah, I'm going to breed them. And I thought, I have to try this. I didn't know anything about geckos at that point. I didn't know what different morphs were. I didn't know that there were different morphs. I didn't know anything. I just thought, these are the coolest animals I've ever seen. I've got to try this. I've got to breed these. So at that point, I started shopping around, looking for different geckos, and I remember typing in breeding crested geckos into Google, and this whole world opened up in front of me. There were breeder websites and how-to pages and forums and so much stuff that I didn't even know existed. I had no idea breeding was even a thing at this point, and then this whole world just exploded into my view, and I was like overwhelmed. I was, wow, there's so many morphs and traits and all these people doing all these crazy things. I got to get into this. So I started shopping for some geckos, and I'll never forget this day. It was a Saturday night. I was in my apartment. My girlfriend was at work, and I was Googling crested geckos, and I came across this breeder's website, and it was different from most breeder websites I'd seen. It was super professional, and you could just click and buy geckos right off the website, and some of these geckos were selling for $300 or $400, which at that point, it sounds laughable now, but at that point it was huge money for a crested gecko, a $300 lizard. Who would have thought? And I was so impressed. I was blown away. And then I got on MySpace, you know, because MySpace used to be a thing. And I looked up this breeder on MySpace, and I found the MySpace page, and I looked through it, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I went, this is just a dude. Like, I was looking at this professional website, and oh my, like, this is such a cool thing. And then I found his MySpace page, and I went, this is just a guy. There's nothing special going on here. I could do this. It's just a dude. This is me in 3 years. He's only 4 years older than me. I could do this. And at that point, I was all in. From that point on, that's all I wanted to do for a living. That's the only thing I could think about was, I'm going to breed crested geckos for a living. That's my job. That's the only thing I've thought about since. That's the point that I really started going crazy, buying a lot of geckos. I got pretty wild with it. I was buying geckos left and right, getting everything I could. I had spreadsheets up on my wall saying, oh, here's the different breeding projects I want to build, and here's how many males and females of each different trait I need for each project. I had it all planned out. I was buying every gecko I could get my hands on. And in 2010, I moved into a bigger apartment. I got a 3-bedroom apartment with a big master bedroom with a walk-in closet, and that became the gecko room. I built these big gecko racks in there, and at one point I had like 400 geckos crammed into this master bedroom in this apartment. It was insane. It was wild. I came up with my company name at that point, Altitude Exotics. People ask me that all the time. How'd you come up with your name? So I live in Denver. And our local hockey team, I was a big hockey fan, so I was watching a hockey game one night, and the Avalanche they used to be broadcast on a sports channel called Altitude Sports and Entertainment. So I was watching that and I thought, oh, that's perfect. I'm born and raised in Denver, Altitude Exotics. I love that name. That's great. My logo with the mountains and the gecko head. I love that story. That was that gecko head is actually a real gecko. His name was Merlin. I had him for a long time, and I held him and took a picture of him, of his head top down, and then I used in Photoshop, I traced the outline of his crest, but the two sides of his head weren't symmetrical, so my logo is actually Merlin's head, the right side, and then I mirror flipped it and put them together. So it was a symmetrical gecko head, so that my logo is an actual gecko that I owned. It was just such an exciting time. But towards the end of my lease at that apartment, I was just bleeding money because I was selling some geckos and I was hatching geckos. I think in 2011 would have been my third year breeding. I hatched 236 geckos. The year before that, I hatched 63. My first year, I hatched 20 something. My very first year I tried to breed, I didn't hatch a single gecko. All my eggs died. And then I slowly got better and better at it and produced more and more. But I was still bleeding money like crazy. I was buying geckos left and right. And I had a decision to make because this was all I could think about for years. This was, I knew this is my career. This is my goal. My family thought I was nuts. My mom thought it was the dumbest thing she'd ever heard. My dad thought it was outrageous. It was so exciting to me though, and I had to decide, am I really going to keep bleeding money? And I was $15,000 in credit card debt, and every time I sold a gecko, that money would just go to buy a new gecko, and I had to decide, am I really going to make this work, or do I need to stop before I ruin my life? So I was at this crossroads in my life where I had to decide if I was going to really make a push to try and make a career out of selling reptiles, or if I was going to quit and at 23 years old just try and find some other career to be happy with. And I knew I'm not going to be happy with just some other job. I'm not the kind of guy that's going to be happy sitting behind a desk or working in a warehouse for the rest of my life. That's not what I want to do. I'm not satisfied with that. So I talked my brother into making a huge leap of faith with me, and together we bought a house. At 24 years old, we qualified for a first-time buyers program, and we had a minimal down payment. We scraped together everything we could, and in February 2012, I bought this house, the one I'm actually in right now. This is my house/breeding facility. It's exactly 50% house, and the entire bottom floor is just geckos. We bought this house specifically for my gecko business, and it ended up being the best decision I ever made. I had enough room here that I could expand, and it was a few lean years when I got into this house. There was times that it was hand to mouth. Like, we got to days where it was, man, I get paid Friday and it's Wednesday night and you're out of food. Tough luck, man. You don't eat for 2 days. It was that kind of living, but I was so determined to make this business work. To me, it was worth it. And slowly but surely, it began to pay off. I began to get a bigger following and a bigger name. I started hatching nicer and nicer geckos. I started, instead of just buying nice geckos and then producing nice geckos, I started to refine and improve on my own bloodlines. And let me tell you, it was a lot of work starting from 2012 when things were real lean and real tight and really, really hard. It was so much work, and it wasn't until about 2017, I think, was the first year that I made a legitimate, like, I can live like this profit off these geckos. It was 5 hard years of just scraping the bottom of the barrel for everything I had. But I had this dream, and I knew this is what I want to do. And ever since, it's just continued to grow and grow and grow, and it gets better and better every day. And I would not trade it for anything in the world. I'm the luckiest guy that this is what I get to do for a living. And when I get to go to my wife's fancy work parties and all of her, she's a counselor, all of her counselor friends talking about, you know, it's just ridiculous. Her talking about mental health issues and all this important stuff. And they go, what do you do for a living, Brian? And I say, I sell lizards. I sell lizards to people for money. And they're like, what did you bring to our party? It's so great that I get to do this for a living, and I could not do this without you guys. So to end this, I really want to say thank you to everybody who's ever bought a gecko from me, everybody who's ever supported me, everybody who's ever watched a video on this channel. everybody who's liked a video, who shared a picture that I put up, everybody who's ever done anything. Thank you guys so much. I could not do this without you. I'm so lucky that I get to do this. I absolutely love it. I love these geckos. I love reptiles. I'm just the luckiest guy ever. So that's it. That's my story, guys. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I hope you guys found that story a little bit interesting or informative, or at least enjoyed hearing it. That's my story, how I got to where I'm at. I really appreciate you sticking around. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know how many geckos do you keep, what other reptiles you have, how long have you been doing it. Give me your story. I love hearing reptile stories. Let me know in the comments down below. As always, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. AltitudeExotics.com, Facebook.com/AEGeckos. Same thing on Instagram. Thank you very much. We'll see you guys soon.